And as I said, be sure to identify yourself. Well, our guests here today, as you see, are Nick Gallo, former Hofstra wrestler, NCAA champion at 126 pounds in 1977. He's from Deer Park High School originally in Deer Park. Hofstra's only NCAA champion so far. Still other chances. And then we have next to him Donnie Pritzlaff, the former Wisconsin great, two-time NCAA champion 2000-2001, four-time All-American. He's from Lyndhurst, New Jersey, just shortly by, 165-pounder. Donnie was also a 2006 World Bronze medalist, and he's currently an assistant at Rutgers. And then toward the end, Kerry McCoy from Penn State, two-time NCAA champ in 1994 and 97. I was teasing him earlier, said he was a pretty good 190-pounder as a freshman, and then a really good heavyweight after that. He's from Long Island. Technically, I guess we should say Longwood High School Middle Island, I believe is correct. And currently the coach at Maryland. Also, 2003 World Silver medalist and 2004 Olympian. So what I'm going to do is I'll start with you, Nick, and just ask you about your thoughts on having the NCAA championships here in New York and what it means to the Metro and the people who have followed wrestling in this area. How you feel about having it here?
It's terrific, and Hofstra being the host school is even better. You know, a lot of years back, the Midwest kind of felt like they were the heartbeat of wrestling, but in New York we always knew we had great states like Pennsylvania and New Jersey, New York, and great wrestling that came out of this area. I think the people are really going to get treated to some great wrestling this weekend.
One quick follow-up for you also, and I'll ask each of the others, your thoughts on when you wrestled in the NCAA championships. You were a two-time All-American, just the experience itself of wrestling in the NCAA championships.
Well, you tried to keep your focus the whole season. You know, that's the big show. And that's what you want to make it to. It's a long wrestling season, and everybody remembers what happens here at this tournament, and the rest of the season kind of gets drifted away. So, for me, you know, we didn't have the large crowds, and I never wrestled in front of 17,000 people, and mine was out in Oklahoma, and I really felt what I was doing was special, you know, and to keep that mental picture, you know, the whole season to work towards this tournament, you know, it was what kept me going. Sure.
Donnie, same questions for you.
Yeah, I think it's great to have it on the East Coast. You know, like Nick said, it's been a stronghold in the Midwest for a long time, and there's been occasions where it was in East Rutherford and up in Albany, and my first NCAA I ever went to was at Maryland, and you know, to think of a kid that's on the East Coast and have an opportunity to come and watch, you know, the best wrestlers in the country compete, I think it's a huge motivating factor, and these kids can get a lot out of it, and it's going to be awesome to wrestle in the Garden. Kerry competed in here in what was that, 2003, and that's the most famous arena in the world, so I know our guys are really excited to have the opportunity to compete this weekend.
Kerry?
It's really exciting. You know, everyone in this room knows how long this process has been. You know, Dylan's done a great job and his staff here at MSG. The last few years, having the Grappling Garden really set the tone for a great event and let the wrestling world know that, you know, New York typically does everything really well, and they're going to do this tournament real well. So I'm excited to be back here, close to home. You know, as alluded to, I got a chance to wrestle here as an athlete a couple times, and you know, having the opportunity for the NCAA tournament, the best collegiate athletic event in the country, you know, maybe as far as wrestling goes, there aren't too many other events that really can compare to this event. So being on the East Coast, as it was alluded to, for the number of great wrestlers that are on the East Coast, and you know, the pendulum is shifting as far as the talent and the level of success on the East Coast. So for all those guys to be able to come and be closer to home and watch the nation's best wrestlers, nation's best coaches and teams get after it, it's really exciting. And you know, New York, I mean, it's been on the East Coast a few times, but Madison Square Garden, the world's greatest arena, you know, it's a long, like I said, it's a long time coming to get it here and to really showcase, you know, the world's greatest sport in the world's greatest arena. So I'm excited to be a part of it and excited to be back here, and you know, looking forward to some great action this weekend.
For those of you who don't cover college wrestling all the time, the tournament has been in New York a couple of times before, as mentioned. 2002 Albany, 1964 it was at Cornell at Ithaca, and then in '84 at the Meadowlands, which not quite New York, but still the Metroplex. Questions for our guests. And if you will, raise your hand, wait for a microphone. And please identify yourself.
I'm Patrick Lanny from New York Star Ledger. My question is for Donnie. Could you just talk about what being a Jersey guy means to you, and the idea of maybe that Jersey toughness, that Jersey grit a little bit?
I mean, I grew up in New Jersey in Lyndhurst, and I always felt like that separated me from people, because being from New Jersey, I always felt like I had an advantage and an edge. And I don't know if it's the way you're brought up, or the town you're from, or whatever it might be. I see that in a lot of our guys. They have a chip on their shoulder. They feel like they have a lot to prove. They have a lot to earn. And and we have guys from New York and PA on our team as well. But there's something about a New Jersey guy that I take him in 10 out of 10 times.
You're on the front.
Hey, I'm Eric Backrack from Newsday. Kerry, you had mentioned that you wrestled at MSG a couple times. When was that, and for you as a Long Islander, what was that experience like? And obviously there's a couple of Long Islanders competing in the tournament this year. What can they expect?
So the times I was able to compete, 1998, the Goodwill Games, and then 2003, the Senior World Championships. So those events were unbelievable. You know, I was in '98. It was 1 year out of college, and had been wrestling on the international scene for a few years. But to be able to compete in Madison Square Garden, you know, it was unbelievable. And we were in the theater the first time, so you know that event right there was so incredible. And it was you know, not to knock anything, but it was just a small part of the theater. And then to come back a few years later and to be in the main arena, it was unbelievable. So just to be in this building and know that so many great athletes and entertainers and other people that got to perform and you know, put on a show in this arena, that you know, now I could say that I was one of those people. And then now with the news of New York being one of the host sites, you know, a few years ago when it was released and everyone got excited about it, you know, I'm sure there's a little bit of hesitation. You know, some people are like, well, you know, how are they going to do it there? It's New York City. A lot of the people may not be used to the speed and the lifestyle of New York, but you know, the Grapple at the Garden the last few years really helped bridge the gap for a lot of the teams. A lot of Midwest teams, a lot of West Coast teams came out for the Grapple. So, as the stage was being set and the foundation was being built, people got more and more excited and really knew what to, you know, look for. As athletes to compete here in the Garden, especially the New Yorkers and Long Islanders, it's unbelievable to be able to compete so close to where you grew up. Friends, family, you know, I know for us growing up, I mean, Newsday was it. You know, if you made it to Newsday, you know, you hang it on your wall and everyone look at it. So for Newsday to be able to cover the events that we've had, and, you know, those kids are going to be getting their name in the paper and getting pictures in it. So it's unbelievable to be able to compete nearby your hometown, and you know, what better place to do it than Madison Square Garden.
This is for Nick.
This is Gary Abbott.
Gary Abbott, yes, I'm sorry. When you were a kid back at Deer Park, and you know, growing up, we had a lot of Knicks and Rangers and things going on, probably even before they had the Islanders and all that. Did you ever think you'd see wrestling in Madison Square Garden? I mean, you know, we'd wrestle in high schools, and the counties then were, you know, not even as big as they are now.
Yeah, probably not. You know, these last, since the World Championships in New York, back when Kerry wrestled, you know, I've noticed this big push to beat the streets. You know, being able to wrestle in the middle of Times Square was crazy, and those events come off better than any events that I know of. And wrestling Iranians, you know, in Penn Station, it's kind of incredible that wrestling has become a sport that people recognize here in the city more. And but years ago, no, I always foresaw it out somewhere in the Midwest, and that's where Princeton was where I went as a sophomore, and that was close enough to the city there. But having it at Madison Square Garden is special. You know, when I tell people this whole past year, you know, the Division I College Nationals are at Madison Square Garden in New York City, they were like, really? You know, and they were surprised. And a lot of people are coming because of that never got a chance to get to an NCAA tournament. So, no, I wasn't real sure about it ever being here, but I'm so glad it is.
I think that's Bobby Locke from Beat the Streets. Let's continue with that conversation you started on Beat the Streets, Nick.
Yes.
How do you feel wrestling has affected you in your business life? And talk about, you know, what kind of business you went into after wrestling, after college?
Right. No, I think about that a lot. You know, what have I been without wrestling? And I really think wrestling has shaped everything inside me. I was a small kid, and I'm not going to say there's prejudices for small people, but there is. I took my son when his birthday was for a go-kart party, you know, and he was older than all his other friends, but they wouldn't let him drive a go-kart by himself because he was short. So for me, my whole life, it's been a sport that makes me feel like I'm 6'5", not 5'6", and I think that shaped my life, my business, you know, my confidence in who I am, and just in people's respect, you know, and I got a lot of that from wrestling, and I really owe it everything. You know, I can go on with another story where I feel like wrestling saved my life because I had a heart condition I never knew about, and the doctors told me I was either going to die in my 20s or I made it to 53 when I had the surgery. So the fact that I pushed myself so hard, you know, and Dan Gable having me run sprints up in Lake Tahoe and where there's no air, and up Pikes Peak and everything else, I said it really pushed my body to form these capillaries that I needed to keep myself alive. So I was kind of surprised about finding that out when I was 53 years old. So I thank wrestling for a lot of different things. That's helped me.
Questions? Yes, sir.
Mitch Rupert from the Williamsport Sun-Gazette, Pennsylvania. Kerry, as we see wrestling in the NCAA championships moving off that Midwestern front, coming to New York, in a couple years going to Cleveland, is it important for the growth of the sport to try and showcase the talent in cities that maybe haven't seen the NCAA championships before?
I think it's kind of a dual-edged sword with that, because you want to take it to an area where they're going to embrace the sport and really celebrate it, but you also want to grow it in areas that may not be as popular. So you have to be very smart and very strategic in where you're putting it, because you know wrestling is growing nationwide at all levels. So we want to make sure we showcase it in the places that can help it continue to grow. But at the same time, you want to make sure, you know, if you got fans from Pennsylvania, from New York, from the Midwest, where you don't want to inconvenience your fan base too much where they can't get to an event and, you know, it's not really as widely accepted. So it has to be very strategic in the place where it's going. So, you know, as I said, on the East Coast, wrestling is growing, it's thriving. Some of the most successful high school programs in the country are, you know, in Pennsylvania and in Ohio and New Jersey. So, you know, those programs are continue to grow. But down south, we have some great wrestlers coming from down south, so it'd be great to have some marquee events down south. And obviously on the West Coast, you know, California is one of the biggest wrestling states out there, and they have thousands of wrestlers there. And, you know, they don't get to get too many collegiate events, you know, showcased out there. So I know the last couple of years we've had the World Cup out there for international wrestling. It's been a huge success. So, you know, you really want to balance and be strategic about the place you go to grow wrestling and also to continue to promote the areas where it's doing really well.
Hi, Al Bebelock with Beat the Streets. The movement that we're trying to create, I don't think people might be aware of what we're trying to do here in New York City to grow wrestling. One of the biggest things that we've done, aside from the Beat the Streets program, is we have really invested in women's wrestling. So we have 26 high schools where it's all girls wrestling. They start doing freestyle in right now. So with that, what you're doing by coming into big cities, 65% of the people in America live in cities, and they have no access. We have a Beat the Streets program in Los Angeles. It's 194 unified school district that does not have one wrestling program. We have 300 high schools in New York City. Brooklyn is 3.5 million people aside, all right? It would be the third largest city. So what we're missing with this great programs and with the sport of wrestling, you're missing 63% of the people. And that's why you don't see too many New York Times, American, is it AP here? New York Times. That's what you have to concentrate on. Grow the sport. Grow it. Thank you.
Thank you. In fact, that makes me want to direct this question to Donnie. Because of events like Beat the Streets, Grapple in the Garden, Grapple on the Gridiron, the special dual match that Iowa did last fall in the football stadium, how important is it for wrestling, college, internationally, whatever, in this country, to find events like that to put on to increase the interest? How important do you think those are?
Oh, I think those events. You look at that Iowa wrestling match against Oklahoma State. It was for any wrestling fan. That was one of the most unbelievable things I've ever seen. You know, to have an outdoor event like that, and was there 45,000 people there? I mean, that was spectacular. I think the eyes of the wrestling world were really opened up, and opportunities were seen that that people are willing and want more events like this, and then having the Beat the Streets events in Times Square, those times. I mean, those are things that I don't think any wrestling fan or any wrestler really thought was possible. So you get an event where there's 45,000 plus, and then right in Times Square, midday on a Thursday, into the evening, they're wrestling Cuba or Russia or Iran down in the Penn Station. So those are special events. I think, having things out on the West Coast, I think having more things in the South, like Kerry's talking about, because there's great wrestling down in the South. You'll look at the NCAA tournament this weekend, and you'll see guys from Kentucky, Georgia, plenty of wrestling down in Florida. So we should be spreading it all over. And then, of course, I think California, the collegiate programs in California have been on the downturn for a while, and now Fresno's coming back, so that's good. But if you get more events out there like the World Cup they've been doing in LA, I mean, it could add to more opportunity and more growth.
Any other questions for our guests?
Bobby Locke, again for Kerry.
You might introduce yourself again.
Yeah, again, Bobby Locke. Beat the Streets and also News Tribune Online up in Boston. So Kerry, how would you compare wrestling today? I mean, you just finished your college career in '97, I think it was. So now you've been on the coaching and the international stage. How do you feel it's changed over? You got 19 years now since you graduated college.
Yeah.
So how do you think it's changed?
For that. It's the sport is it's really evolved to a much higher technical level. I think that back 20 years ago when I was wrestling, it seemed like a lot of the technical things were pretty basic, and you always talk about wrestling, the basic stuff is really what you want to do. And you see some of the guys that are spotlighting this year, they've got the basics down, but they also have some of that flair, some of that funky stuff, some of that flashy stuff. So I think you see a lot more of that. I don't know if it's necessarily good or bad, but I think you see a lot more you see a lot more wide open type wrestling. You see a lot more risk taking, I guess you could say. But ultimately, I think that the wrestlers that you'll see this weekend in particular have been wrestling at a high level, have been exposed to a high level wrestling a lot longer. When I went to school, and you go in Pennsylvania, you see high school wrestling on TV, and it was, in New York on Long Island, you might get one or two matches that got televised if it was, the one or two teams in the state wrestling. And you go in Pennsylvania, almost every weekend, high school wrestling's on TV. Now you take it to now where you've got the internet and sites like Flow Wrestling, USA Wrestling streaming matches. You can go on and you can see wrestling at a high level at any time. So a lot of the kids wrestling now have been exposed to elite level wrestling for a lot longer, which allows them to get better technically, allows them to kind of play with things a little bit more. And so I think that just the evolution of the sport has been really good on a wrestler level. I think the exposure of the sport has really been huge with things that are going on the internet, and obviously events like this, having it in New York City. So just the growth of the sport, even though we still have some huge opportunities, I think the exposure of the sport and the technical improvement of the sport has been really big in the last few years. And I'm excited to see this weekend and see how these guys perform. We got a bunch of guys going for multiple titles. We got a bunch of freshmen in there that are really good. So just a lot of stories to really grow and build a sport and tell our story. And everything's not just about the stereotypical person that did X, Y, and Z and got to the point. You got so many different stories and so many different reasons why people are where they are right now. So I'm excited to see how it all plays out.
Yeah. Thanks. Pat McCarthy, Newsday. Just for anyone on the panel, how has the explosion of MMA impacted wrestling? Have they increased the enrollment of wrestlers, or have you seen any fluctuations since it's come on the scene?
Nick, you want to start? Yeah, sure. Definitely. I think the message that you hear from the MMA is that you better know how to wrestle, because it really determines. It could determine a win and a loss by having that background in ground wrestling. Of course, it's different. You don't want to go to your belly. You want to go to your back if you get taken down. But I think it's impacted the kids a lot. Most of the kids that like MMA realize that they're going to have to join a wrestling team or some type of wrestling training.
Donnie, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that MMA is a way for wrestling to become more popular. I think now you talk to, and you go to run into a guy in a deli and he notices your ears, or it's not so foreign anymore because everybody is seeing it on pay-per-view for these giant amounts of money. So I think it definitely has added exposure to the regular person that was a boxing fan or something. Now he's watching MMA and he's like, oh, how come all these wrestlers are dominating everybody? So then they start to get interested in wrestling. That's the way I've kind of felt that MMA's helped.
Yeah, and if you look at MMA right now, majority of the champions have a strong wrestling background. So everything's been said. Wrestling is kind of the training ground for MMA success. I think again, what's important with MMA right now in particular is, again, I said earlier about strategic partnerships and strategic thinking. Making sure that you get some of those wrestlers that go out there and they always talk about wrestling and how wrestling has helped them and how wrestling is important to their success. So, the strategic nature of being able to promote the sport in other areas. So, you don't have too many of these guys that go on and they win a UFC championship and they don't talk about the fact that they started in wrestling. So, that also brings some light to the sport and to the athletes that are out there. So, I think it's great. It's definitely not for me. I never want to go out there and have someone have to punch me to get a paycheck. But but the guys that are doing it, they're doing a great job and they're promoting our sport. And it's showing that with a wrestling background, you can be very successful. And the other thing too, I think that's important to recognize is the guys that may not have been as successful, national champ or multiple All-American, are doing well in MMA and they still credit. It's not like you have to be a four-time All-American to be a successful MMA athlete, but just the foundation of wrestling has really helped you, and that's something that's important because it really grows and says the guys that may not have reached the pinnacle of their sport in wrestling still can go on and be successful, and that foundation of what they learned and everything they've done in the sport can help them to the next level, which is one of the basic foundations that we talk about wrestling. Wrestling will help you do anything and be successful in anything in your life, and MMA is a great example.
If there's nothing else, we'll wrap up the formal part here. You can stay around and get some one-on-ones if you need them. Also,